Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do an album review today, which is where we check out an entire album, pausing it between certain tracks and analyzing what's going on in it. We're going to be looking at Seven Spires' debut album, Solveig, which is really interesting because when I was trying to get everything prepared, I noticed that the first 7 tracks were off of the EP that came just before this, with the subsequent 8 tracks being added on to that original EP. So this is really interesting. It feels almost like a work of art that evolved over time. You kind of get half of it written first, and then you move on to the next half later. One interesting thing going on here is right at the beginning. Most of these tracks are between 3 and 5 minutes long, so it's a lot of short tracks. Still adds up to an hour though. But we have a 1 minute, 1.5 minute-ish intro into what seems to be our first proper track, and then a 27-second reprise of the intro. And I'm curious if all of this moves together, kind of weaves together. If it does, I'm not really going to want to stop between any of it. We may run into the 4th track as well, but definitely after track 4, we're going to pause it and talk about it. That'll give us about 10 minutes worth of music to discuss too. So let's dive into this. We're going to start off with the first track, the Siren. Got a nice little 3/4 idea. Really interesting passing of the baton on that. I love the snare roll into that. It's a lot of instruments. Triangle, timpani, maybe even a wood block in that stack. Really nice building of tension right here. I'm curious where it's going though. I love the use of dynamics already. The swells, the sforzandos. Really great use of volume all throughout this intro. And of course, all this power and majesty pressed up against this toy piano sounds. Passing that toy piano melody to a vocal choir. Was not expecting a belt, but I mean, it works.
Angel of your hell away from home. Wings of dust to carry you.
Really interesting to move from that adventurous gallop to just this pedal tone writing. Really nice tom rundown. That was a fun run. One out of the key, too. Interesting. So they went for more of a Baroque feel on the guitar melody that's not present in the vocal melody. Love that layered vocal bit. And that was kind of more of a bluesy idea. So we've gone from this idea on brass to vocals to strings. Okay. They were kind of all over the place with
where everything's as real as you let it be. I'll be your host this eve. So sit back,
such a big bass tone.
If you take it, embrace it, succumb to the dark. Escape into a night when no one knows who you are. You crave it, awaken the cool bizarre. Lose yourself to the twisted art. Let your demons out, let your spirit free. It's only gonna cost you all the cabaret dreams.
Okay. Interesting choices. Love this like loungy metal though.
Your subconscious reality. Monsieur, have a drink and see. The dancers dance and the singers sing. If you take it, embrace it, succumb to the dark.
So groovy, which makes sense. It's got that lounge sort of backbeat drive. That's an interesting beginning. It feels like it should have so much punch, and it doesn't. Okay, so we've shifted to a dark waltz. Guitars and bass are just doing chords. Very theatric. Bringing back in this, reintroducing this rhythmic pattern a couple of bars early. Yeah, and here the waltz is really felt. So we had tremolo violin work right there at the end as well. So this is fun. I think it's really interesting. Our first three tracks all share a similar melody. And you know, our third track's 20 seconds long, so it's, uh, it's weird to put it as its own track. I feel like it makes more sense as the intro to Cabaret of Dreams, and just for the listener to be like, oh, it's that line again, you know, it's that melody again, and for them to just kind of have this innate understanding that we've entered a reprise. Um, but whatever, you know, it obviously, you know, this isn't my vision. This is Seven Spires' vision. They wanted it this way. I'm sure they have a reason for it. Um, so I think first we really got to talk about instrumentation. There's a lot of it going on in here. We have our metal bands, drums, guitar, bass, vocals. The vocals have quite a few different deliveries on them and effects, possibly. There is a choir effect. Well, there's a choir sound going on. I don't know if there's actually multiple recordings of that. I don't know if they had a choir. I don't know if it's an effect, but it is a different delivery as well on top of the belt and the semi harsh and the clean. Um, but we have all this coming from the band, and then we have so many elements that are outside of that that are sort of like a revolving door. We started off the album with toy piano and like a wide auxiliary percussion set. I heard, I think, in this one stack, like woodblock, timpani, and triangle. We also had chimes at one part. Um, Brass, our first introduction to that key melody that we heard several times over our first 6 minutes of this album, was all done through with brass. The Reprise gave us strings, which we ended up hearing more of in Cabaret of Dreams. Um, it feels like there's a full orchestra behind the band that isn't utilized all the time, which I really appreciate. It isn't like symphonic metal, where they kind of, well, I say symphonic metal. I'm talking about like as a whole. I'm sure there's going to be offshoots, specific bands that you could cherry pick and say, oh, not all of them. No, I'm not saying all of them. Just as a whole, a lot of the symphonic metal I hear, the symphonic aspects are presented through one of the members of the band, usually on keyboards, right? Or a synthesizer. And so if there isn't a symphonic element, that person just doesn't do anything. And that's just not a concept that happens often in rock and metal bands. Everybody's always doing something unless it's a small moment. Like if we have, a bass heavy section, a guitarist might quit out for, the 40 seconds that a verse happens. Um, but for the most part, everybody's playing all the time, which means that there's always a combination of the metal and the symphonic, the metal and the orchestra. But with here, I'm going to assume that most of this is backing track. Actually, I can look this up real quick. I do have. So it's written by Adrian. Vocals. Oh, so she's the vocalist. She also does the orchestration. There's a drummer, a guitarist, a bassist. So there's only one guitarist. Um, our guitarist does some backing vocals, and that's it. Yeah, they don't have a keyboardist, so I was right with that. Because, and here's why: the symphonic elements, what a keyboardist would be playing, are not. It's not always present, and I really like that idea. I've talked about before that one of the strengths of very large bands, like when we hit classical music and you're looking at a full orchestra, is that you can hone in on what specific timbres you want as a composer for a specific section. If you don't want the trumpets here because they have a specific sound to them that you think runs counter to what you're trying to do musically, then you just don't include them. It's pretty normal in classical music to have sheet music where it'll say 12 bars of rest. We actually have a symbol so that you don't just have 12 empty bars. Like it is such a core aspect of the style that we have symbols to notate this, that you're not going to be playing for, minutes at a time. Um, and that's just not something that the smaller groups of rock and metal can do, where you have one of each instrument and they kind of have one role each: your high melody, your low melody, your lead melody, and your percussion, right? If you remove any of them, you're going to remove an entire aspect of the track. You stop playing guitar and you lose your high end, um, or you lose your chords. If your vocalist is the high end and your guitar is doing foundation at that point. And so I really like this approach where they say, we really want the strings here. That's it. Later on, they're like, we really want brass here. This part we want, a much wider orchestration. We'll pull in a couple of areas. We'll even bring in, some auxiliary percussion stuff. Um, it is, it's a lot closer to classical music. It's not just bringing in the sounds of classical music, but writing it like a metal track. There is a classical element to this, and I really love that. Um, so it's like what it leads into, though, why I brought this whole thing up, why I think the instrumentation is important, is because every track can have an identity, and it's not just driven by, what combination of pedals am I going to use to craft a guitar tone. There are bands where they use different guitar tones for every song, but there very rarely do I hear a different tone for every song. They usually have three or four or five kind of styles and bounce between them. So the songs can have personality, but not completely individual. Like I think we're going to end up with here. I think every song is going to kind of have its own vibe, not just on key or tempo or time signature, but also in what voices we end up hearing. So far, we have 3 tracks, one of which is purely instrumental, and they are all so vastly different from each other. but it also allows us to do really cool things like I pointed out earlier, where we have our main melody start on one instrument, get tossed to another, and then get tossed to another, and we can hear this evolution of the concept both in layering and in timbre. It's there's so much you can do when you introduce so many instruments that you can remove some or just plain not write them into some songs. Now, the next thing I want to touch on though is key, because I think all of our songs here are in very different keys. Not to mention they all have very, well, there are sections in here that move into different vibes as well. Like Encounter, our second track, for the most part, it has a kind of a adventurous tone to it until we hit the pedal tone element. But the vocal melody is very modern. It feels like we could adapt that to a lot of different styles of modern music and it would fit in just fine. Our first guitar solo, though, went pure Baroque. And so it's really strange because, like, the chorus and the first guitar solo were back to back. We didn't really have much of a transition into it. Just our vocalist stopped singing, and then there was like one bar maybe, and then we were into the guitar solo, and you could feel this shift because they're practically back to back. And so when we got our second guitar solo, I thought it was weird that it was more of a modern rock guitar solo, utilizing well, not so much the composition of like notes and stuff. There was basically faster playing with some moments of pause for pacing in both of the guitar styles, both of the guitar solos, but it was the note choices that changed. And so we entered a different key for our second guitar solo as well, which felt more in line with what our vocalist was presenting to us in the melody we got out of the verse and chorus. So we already have this shifting sound in one single track, but then we pull in the Cabaret of Dreams and we are in yet another key with another feel. This one moves more towards a waltzy idea. And, all of this is also juxtaposed with our intro track, the Siren, which feels pretty much like traditional. Man, we have the ostinato in the toy piano sounds, and then we have the really nice swells. I mean, it's kind of a mish because I was gonna say Baroque just based on some of the note choices, but the composition doesn't really feel Baroque. It feels a bit more modern, with like a touch of Renaissance. It's a mishmash of a lot of classical influence, I think, is what I'm just gonna call the Siren's writing. Um, Also kind of feels very modern soundtracky. So yeah, it's just a mishmash of a lot of classical influences, which again is really cool because it juxtaposes everything else that we've heard. And it's just like every single track so far has had a very specific sonic identity, not just in the key, but the styles of music, the composition choices, the instrumentation. Yeah, I'm having a blast so far. Um, I have some complaints. I think I'm gonna hold them off until the end and see what happens, because like I had mentioned, these first seven tracks were from their original EP. The second half of this album would be newer material after they had that initial experience of making an EP. So I'm wondering if there was any maturity that went on there. And that's not to say that this is immature. It's just there are sections that feel phenomenally written. And then there's other sections that feel very functional. You know what? Let's get into this. I think that's where we're gonna go right here. We're halfway done with their EP. Let's talk about it, or what was in their EP. Um, the intro to the Siren. Well, the Siren, which is the intro, um, and the latter half of Cabaret of Dreams are very interestingly composed. There's some neat depth to them. There's really great dynamic work. There's fantastic layering. the rest of what we've heard so far, which is the core verse chorus aspect of Cabaret of Dreams and Encounter, feels a bit safe comparatively. And if this was any other band where we just got this, I wouldn't even be bringing this up. This is strictly because I've heard what they can do at their peak. And if, the Siren is them writing at like an 8 or a 9, stuff like the Encounter is like a 6 or 7. It's not bad, and it's really not that far below what they did with the Siren. But you can't start off with something that fantastically layered with such dynamic work to it, so meticulously crafted, and then give me a pretty typical metal track with pedal tone writing, which is a personal thing. That's a bias, right? I shouldn't have pulled that one in. The rest of it, I think, is fair criticism. The gallop, not galloping. What do they call it? Chugging? Is that what it is? Pedal tone writing is what I'm just gonna call it, though. Sitting on that open string, or the root note of the chord if it's not an open string, and just like doing a rhythmic idea on it, that it's not interesting to me, especially when the intro had this beautiful writing. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is I look forward to the great classical leaning composition, and the metal stuff in between is kind of what I have to put up with to get to the good stuff. That's where I'm at right now, and that could change. But after this first 10 minutes, that's where I feel I am. Um was there anything I wanted to talk about specifically? Well, I want to bring up something in Cabaret of Dreams, and I kind of touched on it quickly during the reaction, but I think it was the chorus. Um, it felt kind of off. It might have been a pre-chorus idea. At least I thought it was, but then we hit a point where we repeated the chorus once, and it started off the same way. And it was supposed to be like this. To me, it feels like a big moment, and it is completely undercooked. The vocals just lack the punch on the big syllables, and then get punchier in the EQ during the more just melodic parts. It felt kind of backwards to me. Um, I don't know. There was something really weird there. Maybe there could have been, maybe it was designed to be that way, but then I think changing up the vocals the first couple of lines might have just worked better. Push them out to the side, or super compress them, or something, to kind of designate, give them a little marking that they're not supposed to be heard larger and louder like the rest of them are. It kind of felt out of place. Um, Drumming solid, guitar work solid. I love that bass section. Really great bass tone. The vocals. Let's talk about the vocals real quick, because I wasn't expecting this. I have heard a couple Seven Spires tracks before, and I think it was one of the December live streams we listened to one of Adrian's covers of We Three Kings. Is that what it was? So I'm not completely unfamiliar with some of what this band does, but I was not expecting so many cleans, because from what I've heard of her, she has a fantastic clean, but does frequently utilize this black metal scream that we haven't really heard much here, other than the bridge in Cabaret of Dreams, which kind of went to like a scary, screamy section for a moment. Um, but just how many different types of vocals she can pull out. This is an extremely talented person, and to me, knowing that she's also uh the writer of the orchestra parts, the non, well, I mean, it says written by, I wonder if, I mean, written by, I really wish this place would use composed as well. because there isn't a lyrics section. And whenever I see written by the vocalist, I think that they wrote the lyrics. But then you never see, composed by. Composed would be specifically writing the music. So I'm going to assume that she wrote all the music. She also does the orchestration. Um, so maybe she writes all the music. But even if she just does the orchestral stuff, knowing that she does that and also has all this vocal range, just a phenomenal performer. All right, I'm gonna pause real quick, hit some lyrics, and come back and let you know what I find, and then we'll move on to the next track. All right, so Encounter is interesting. The chorus states, "I am the siren of the eventide to guide your lonely soul to shore." And the your seems to be talking about this character that's spoken about in verse 1 and 2, who is a loner angel. I don't know, but what I think is interesting is that our narrator is the Siren of Eventide, and our opening track is the Siren, so that would be her theme. I wonder if that's going to pop up more often than just our intro and our reprise, especially given the theatric nature of everything we've heard so far. Um, but yeah, it seems to talk about. It says, "Angel of your hell away from home, wings of dusk to carry you wherever you may roam, watching for your time." Oh, wait. No, she's describing herself. Wow. I thought it said angel of hell, but it says angel of your hell away from home. Wings of dusk to carry you wherever you may roam, watching for your time. A loner born beneath the midnight star, lost beneath the emerald waves, through hellish sun and frost, you're never far from a place you don't belong. So there is a person, I think, that this siren is watching, although this Yor could just be a general, a royal Yor, anyone that she's watching. Um, to guide the lonely souls to shore. Our final chorus has a new line to it. It says, "I'm the needle still beneath your skin, salvation from the ache that burns within." Not quite sure what that's alluding to yet, but we will see. The Cabaret of Dreams. I love this. I just love the whole idea of having this loungy music merged with metal. I think it works really well. And it's pretty much what it says. It's a place that you go and relax and watch art and performances as a cabaret is. It does seem to be a bit of a darker cabaret, and it implies something of an afterlife. There is a couple of lines. The chorus specifically says, "Don't be afraid, you'll be amazed. Let your demons out, let your spirit free. It's only going to cost you your soul at the cabaret of dreams. Let your sanity go. It isn't yours to keep. It's only going to cost you your soul." So, this is like a devil's cabaret. I'm trying to figure out where the dreams part comes in. Um, but it does encourage people to be whatever they want to be. It says, "Take it, embrace it, succumb to the dark, escape into a night where no one knows who you are. You crave it, awake it, the core bizarre, lose yourself to the twisted art." And of course, all of this comes to a head in the verse 3, which I think is where we saw our first harsh vocal. It says, "Damned is he who walks with these disenchanted souls. Damned are those lost and pitiless. Our freedom lies in the conflagrant morn. Bereft of hope, there is no escape. There is no afterlife, only this." So, whatever this area is, once you go into it, the only way out is to lose your soul and your sanity. There is nothing that happens after this. And between this and our opening idea of the siren, I'm curious if the siren guided somebody here. I'm wondering if this is a concept album at all, but I always have to kind of start making dots and try to connect them as we go through these because I actually looked and I couldn't find out if this was a concept album or not. I probably didn't look hard enough. Maybe there's some sources I don't know about. Wikipedia was very vague and limited in its information. Probably should have checked out Rate Your Music. The problem with that is though, is that they don't have like a conceptual tag, which would be fantastic. But I would have to look through reviews and see if the word concept album comes up, and then I'm kind of spoiling myself on some of it as well. So I don't know. Maybe there's a good place to find out if something is a concept album or not. But we do have two supernatural-esque songs, and both of them bring up the ideas of hell or hellish landscapes. So there's thematic connections between the two of these already. And then, of course, our first and third tracks were instrumentals, so we're not going to worry about those lyrically. Let's dive into the next track here. We got choices. In fact, we have a lot of single word titles coming up. I don't know when I'm going to stop it next. Let's just run it and see what happens. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. The tremolo violin. Okay. I love this. There's like a synth pad operating in the background. Those harsh belts. Yes, I love how layers keep phasing in and out. Is that Phrygian dominant? Yeah, so there's a couple of things that this song did very well that I've been looking forward to, and it fixes my biggest problem that I had talked about the previous tracks. Well, some of the problem sections. The tracks were fine as a whole. Um, the very beginning of this track, we introduce this really nice classical, or let's just say orchestral based concept. And we build up these layers, we create these beautiful textures and chordal movements and melodies, and then the guitars come in. And the guitars have this really chunky, aggressive riff to them. I think it was a single note as well. But the thing is that that is what metal does. You know, I talked about it earlier. I'm not a big fan of pedal note writing. Not my favorite thing that metal does, but it is something that is very metally, especially in the context of metal music and the sounds that guitars work with, and just that really rule of cool, powerful sound. The metal instruments were playing metal, and the orchestral instruments were doing things that orchestral instruments do well, which is layering and textures and just multifaceted components because they have so many instruments to utilize. And this is something that I've talked about with uh, symphonic metal bands in the past, is that we either have something that is symphonic music and there is a guitar, or there's metal music and, well, there's a violin. And I think this is one of the first. There might have been a Dimmu Borgir track we checked out once that I think had a really perfect balance. I can't remember precisely what track that was, or if it was a Dimmu track. But this right here, I think, might be one of my go-to examples now of how to perfectly balance this. The guitars aren't relegated to just that metal texture to make the classical music sound aggressive or distorted. And the violin isn't there just to give it that extra symphonic flair, but still be written like a metal instrument. This is both of the worlds written as they would normally be put together, and it is just, yeah, I love this. Like I said, not my favorite riff style for it, but the fact that they did it like this, I'm more than happy to just overlook the fact I'm not a huge fan of that riff style and just fall. I melted when it happened. I really did. Something I didn't touch on too much that I probably should have already is these compressed belts where Adrian just goes for these high notes and puts a ton of compression on them, natural compression, and it is just a gnarly scream. Um, but there's like this beauty to it too. It's very rounded off sounds, and she lands in these pitches. And it's just, you really get that resonance of the key note, especially when she lands on a note and just holds it, right? And you land on these key notes that are resonant with the chord around them and just has all the really strong characteristics of the fifth or the third, or I don't really think we landed on too many fourths here. That's a little bit more tension filled. A lot of this stuff was really resolved, so you get that really strong characteristic from the tone, and then that bite, that compression, that distortion on top of it. And it is just, I don't, I picked it up in a couple of the reactions so far. A couple of the songs are like, that's a powerful note. But I think right here specifically, and what I think is the chorus, maybe? Nope, looks like it's just a verse. Huh. Our final verse. Um, when they hit hard. It's just, I can't say I'm a fan of it every single moment, but when she lands on those notes and just holds them, or puts the run with that compression on top, and then lands on a really strong resolution or something, just it is good. And again, I'm still kind of surprised because I kind of, maybe I've only heard their later works, and I'm still expecting more of those black metal style harshes in here, and we haven't really had any. So maybe this was just before she started using that technique or developing it. But I'm really digging this side. I like their music and her cleans, despite that specific type of harsh that she uses in the other tracks I've heard. So this not having it is really, really more my cup of tea. Um, the last thing I want to touch on here before we hit the lyrics and move on is layers, use of layers, and revolving door of layers, I think is the best way I want to put it. Um, it was really cool to hear the violins at the beginning do a lot of these suspended tones, holding out these notes over the guitar riffage and playing these beautiful melodies on top. This idea then gets passed over to Adrian in the lyrics. Our vocalist takes over the concept of these suspended notes and moving runs into suspended notes to play over the guitar work. And this was gorgeous on its own. But in the end of the song, the final minute and a half or so, we got the introduction concept with the metal, with our vocalist singing these suspended notes, and the violins got a brand new line for this since their role had been given to the vocals. But everything else on the symphonic side was replaying what they had at the start. So we added in all these extra layers underneath this part that we had already heard before. We got a brand new context of it with a mix of new and old parts, and it was just really nice to see this concept of, you could call it foreshadowing, you could call it it's not really foreshadowing, it's more of a callback, isn't it, of just bringing back these old ideas, putting them in a new context with sections that were inspired by or a variation of the same things we had heard back then. It's just like, the writing on this is so good. This is probably my favorite song so far. It hits everything I love about music consistently. We got another guitar solo in here, and the guitar solo kind of gave, well, actually her vocals too, once that kind of clicked. I was trying to figure out what was special about the chords they were using, or the key that our vocalist was in, and I couldn't quite land on it until we hit the guitar solo, and it's definitely Phrygian adjacent. I guessed Phrygian dominant, and I would love if somebody's got an ear for chords, can pick that out. The only reason I say dominant is because Phrygian dominant works really well with metal pentatonic stuff. So this feels like metal with a little bit of that Phrygian edge to it, that Phrygian characteristic. So that's why I'm guessing dominant. But I've said before, hearing chords and naming chords are not my strong suit. But Phrygian just happens to be one of my favorite modes. So I love writing in it, and maybe just because I have so much exposure to it, I can kind of hear when it's being utilized. Just a really, just a really great song from top to bottom. Definitely my favorite. So I gotta write that choices because I make a spreadsheet of all the music that I listen to in a year, and I include the stuff in it. This is an album I've listened to, even if I didn't pick it myself. Um, and I always like to make a note of what my favorite track from that album was, and that is at the top right now. Um, Let me hit the lyrics and then we'll move on. So we have, once again, our narrator speaking to someone and guiding them towards somewhere. I don't want to get all hyped up yet. We're only 33% of the way through this. We got a lot of music ahead of us. This might be a concept album where our narrator, the Siren of Eventide, takes people places and we get to hear about these people and what she can do for them. Or it could just be that I'm putting too much faith into this first person writing, which is pretty typical for a lot of music. It's not like there's any strong indications here. But I am kind of leaning in that direction for the moment. So, anyways, this person that she's trying to guide is a nobody, just kind of living life day by day without actually doing anything. Our opening line is breath without living isn't truly life at all. You've been numb for so long. I'm kind of getting the idea that this is just a person who goes through the motions. They wake up, go to work, go home, watch TV or whatever, and go to bed. And every day is the same day. And her offer here, the chorus says, "Take my hand now. I can show." Well, this is the verse 1 says, "Let me show you there's so much more than this." Then the chorus says, "Take my hand, but remember, should you leave, you won't return. A single ray of sunlight and your soul will burn." There was something about this chorus too. The rhythmic, something about the rhythm on it was very interesting. It reminded me of a vastly different style of music because a lot of this feels like it stems from, what is the traditional metal? I don't know. It's very modern metal, but it feels like it hails from like the 70s, 80s, 90s kind of metal stuff. And something about this chorus was very not that. Maybe like modern metalcore or popular metal or something. I don't know. Something I don't. I wish I could remember. But anyways, verse 2 is interesting because it's almost like she's trying to convince this person that there's really not too many downsides. It says, "Fear me and love me, that's all I desire. Your soul for eternal." The second time the soul has been brought up. "Your soul for eternal bliss. Anything you require, any deepest dark desire will be satisfied." Verse 3, though, introduces some caveats. It says, "You are weak, my dear, clear your mind. Would you stay with me for all of time?" But there's a second line of dialogue going on here that says, "Choose well or suffer till the end of your life. Would you trade your mortal life to be mine, the deepest black with no escape, never more to see the light of day?" Almost like a hidden message. So we do have a character who seems to be otherworldly, kind of again going into this hellish element of dealing with the devil and trading souls and all that. These are common themes throughout the album so far. And once again, we have the promises of positivity and removing pain and being yourself and giving into your desires, but there's a cost to it all. All right. After that, we have two more that were on the original EP. That is Closure and 100 Days. I'm going to try to run these back to back just so we can finish out this opening half of the album. Closure is 6 minutes almost though, so maybe I'll have some thoughts on that and we'll pause. I don't know, you guys know how it is, right? I always tell you, hey, we're going to run the next few back to back, and then, there's something I really want to talk about. So let's figure out what's going on in Closure. There we go again with another Phrygian mode. Wasn't as happy with that section.
The chapter's done, the pages torn, the book has turned to dust.
Just that massive bass tone.
Time of dreams and best intentions. Hot shoulders and sheltered waves of copper and ivory and dust. Shielded the empty sky pouring down.
Really beautiful how that opened up, which led very well into this chorus.
So it won't harm me anymore. Cut me off, cut it out. So it won't harm me anymore.
Oh, that irresolution. Interestingly, again, the chorus is done in a very different mode than the rest of the track.
Every heart craves closure, each more difficult than the last. Else they grasp on the shrines of hope, the asphyxiated dead. The heavens split open, the days undone, the earth wrenches apart. Every syllable gushing from a crumbling mind. Take away everything I love about this pain.
interesting. These sections are just all over the place. We have high points, we have low points, and no real connective tissue.
Take away everything I love about this pain, so it won't haunt me anymore. Cut me off, cut it out, so it won't haunt me
Well, I had initially enjoyed this track. Everything in the latter half was a bit not what I a lot of things that just didn't work for me. Um I like the main riff to this. It gets tossed around between the guitars and a harp, I think. I think a keyboard picks it up at one time. The vocalist dives into it a bit there at the end when we got that really nice compressed run within it. The rest of the track seems to go in a different direction, though. Our verse tries to carry it over while also leaning more into something pentatonic, and then our chorus goes into something very poppy. And then we hit the bridge, which was just it was like 5 or 6 riffs. They were like, "Hey, we really enjoy this riff. It doesn't really go with the song, but we're gonna cram that right in there." And then this is a riff that I enjoy, so we're gonna put that in there. And then this is a concept we like. We're gonna toss that in there. I want to put a solo in there, so let's put that in. But none of them really go together. It's just a series of segmented ideas. And the transition back into our final chorus was just as abrupt. Um, this is a song that to me feels like a lot of isolated ideas. And, most of the stuff on the album so far has kind of been like that. I've already talked about how the songs move between modes and keys, just sort of at a whim. So it's not like cohesion is a strong element, but for whatever reason in this bridge, it really stood out to me. Whereas it really hasn't been a problem for me up until this point. It's been something I've kind of noticed on the periphery, but haven't vocalized yet. It hasn't really been something that's distracted me from my enjoyment, but there it did. Um, to me, the highlight of this track is the chorus. I love it. It's such a departure from everything else we've listened to on the track so far. And it's so poppy ballad and it works. Uh, Part of it, I think, is just, again, showing off variety and range of our vocalist because going down to just basic chords for the guitars isn't really showing off. So the chorus, I don't think, really highlights anybody other than Adrian in this case, but having these very front-placed vocals with the airy delivery. It is a style we haven't heard yet, so this is like the fifth vocal delivery we've had from her. The riffs continue to work based on a lot of pedal tone ideas. Um, like I said, it's metal that reminds me of older styles of metal, and I think they do a pretty good job at punching it up into a modern production, occasionally bringing in modern ideas, but as talented as our guitarists are, I don't know that this album's really going to interest me in that area. I'm just not a big fan of that style of riff writing. We got some really nice layered vocals at the end of one of our verses, I think. And interestingly, the lyrics for our bridge are not here. I think that's because this set of lyrics is specifically for their EP, and maybe they added a new section to the bridge. Uh, Actually, let me look that up real quick. I'll do that when I pause. That makes more sense. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about? I think that's about it. More Phrygian, more vocal deliveries, and more distinction between sections, which is just, I hope that does, I hope I don't get stuck on that. Because, like I said, cohesion and transition really hasn't been a key element of their writing so far. It really hasn't distracted me like right here, and I don't want it to start distracting me. So I'm gonna hit the lyrics real quick and get back from that. So this is, I think this comes at us from two perspectives, which would indicate why there's such harsh changes. Our verses appear to use many of the same vocabulary as we've seen in the past for everything that I have seen from the first person view of the Siren of Eventide. It is a bit more sophisticated, a bit more metaphorical, and we have things like every heart craves closure, each more difficult than the last, else they grasp onto shreds of hope, the asphyxiated dead. And then a chorus is take everything I love from this about this pain so it won't haunt me. Cut me off, cut me out so it won't haunt me. Like, it's very straightforward, it's very simple language. And this makes me think that it's uh, some human or an innocent soul, wherever we're going with this angle, who is asking the siren to deliver them from this pain, right? Much like we had just seen with Choices. In fact, this might be a direct sequel to Choices, in which the character has decided to, what was that? Of course. Has chosen to give themselves to the narrator, which I still think is the siren, and to give up their soul for peace. So I think that's what's happening there. And that's pretty much the whole song. It seems that they have lost somebody that they cared about. Like they said, take away everything I love about this pain. I don't think they necessarily love the pain, but there are elements that the pain reminds them of that is from a loving angle. Maybe somebody they loved died or left them, and that is there's it's that feeling sometimes where you want to feel the pain just to remember that person, that kind of thing. And then, of course, we have every heart craves closure, which kind of leans more into that element. What's really interesting is that our bridge says, can you escape your destiny? Do you control your own fate? Temptations suffocating. Do you know what you've become? And I think that was done with the growling, if I remember right. And that seems to take a completely different stance from everything else that's happened, but the whole bridge was just so uh, disconnected from the rest of the track musically anyway, so it makes sense that I don't really understand what's going on lyrically there either. Alright, so let's wrap up this original 7-track run. And then we'll check out the 8 tracks that were written after the original EP. So the next track on the list is not Closure, 100 Days. Let's see where we're going from here. Alright, I don't think we've had any woodwind so far. So having the flute is a new voice. Continuing the airiness from the flute timbre to hers. I really like that grace note before beat 3, or before the third note on our guitar.
Lost to the stars in the sky, 100 days of darkness, 100 days of lonely bitter love, 100 days of darkness, 100 days of silence and peace.
It's interesting how the 100 days part is the same rhythm as what the piano was playing. We haven't really seen much layering like that.
The dark he waits for the lonely moon to rise from the frozen earth he watches. Venus glowing soft, illuminating the night. A single spark is worth the fight.
Yeah.
Days of darkness, 100 days of lonely bitter love, 100 days of darkness, 100 days of silence and night.
Really interesting transition there. I forgot to bring it up, but Closure also had a really strange ending where we decided to pick up the pace to a double time for the last 15 seconds of the track. And this one built up all that energy. I really loved the rising idea into it, bringing in all these different instruments, layering up these melodic lines over the course of like 2 bars to bring us into this big, giant final chorus. with all these layers. It's very powerful, very beautiful, and at the end, just kind of bring it down and kind of lacks resolution. Sonically, we just kind of get like three piano notes and then nothing. The piano just kind of stops playing. The vocals have a bit of a reverb off of them, a tail, but it's I feel like the ending should have been 7 seconds longer. Hold out a note or allow proper reverb or something. We almost got like a lack of resolution in our chord, and we also got a lack of resolution in just the overall sound of it. I will say though, I'm trying to keep in mind here that this was an album closer, and I think it does a fantastic job of that. A lot of album closers, in my experience, tend to be a bit different from the rest of the album. Um, it's not always true, but I do feel like, I don't know why. I feel like bands take chances with album closers. Maybe they think most people don't get to it. Because, a lot of people listen to singles. So maybe they just know that they can be a bit more experimental or maybe a bit closer to what they want, even if it's not necessarily marketable or something like that. So right here, though, we have a ballad. Very different. And we kind of alluded to this, which I thought was nice. In Closure, our chorus kind of had that pop ballad element that we saw at full display here. So I really like that bit of foreshadowing there. It kind of brings the entire first seven songs into a really nice little condensed story. We start low, we got this rising action, we get into our second track, we get to hear some really great concepts. Our fourth and fifth tracks bring out some stronger elements. Our sixth track kind of brings the energy down a little bit, and our seventh track is a proper ballad that works with the lower energy that we've been pointing towards. It is a phenomenal little pocket story, and I'm interested to see where they take it from here. This was condensed and written in this way because it was designed to be a set of single tracks to exist on their own. Or that's how I'm interpreting it. It could be that it was always a 15 track epic. They wanted to put the first seven together as an EP to promote or, whatever, send out to record labels or something, have something that you could purchase. So maybe the next 8 tracks are going to fit perfectly with this because it was always conceived like this. So I guess that's an option as well. But I am curious where they go from this because this is just a perfectly condensed work of art. Unfortunately, though, I also think it's their weakest song compositionally, but I think it's also because it is what it is. It's a ballad to wind up an album. In a vacuum, I don't think it's that strong, but doing its job of wrapping an album up, especially an album that is on the tail end, bringing the energy down anyways, I think it does a fantastic job at what its purpose is. But so far, I'm still chasing the high from our opening track, the Siren, and from our fifth song choices. I'm still looking for more of that composition, and this did not deliver on it. However, it is a beautiful song. I love the way that we introduced the flute. I love how the flute introduced the vocal style that our vocalists leaned into for this one. And it's all those I think I've talked about that so many times about passing on an idea from one instrument to another. It is something this band does exceptionally well. Whether it's a melodic line or introducing a concept or a mode or an emotion or a melody. We hear it so often of how one instrument starts something and somebody else continues it. It is just, I'm a big fan of that. And this band has been doing it quite a bit. Um, I think that's really it. It's a good ballad, continues on with the writing that they've done, and has an odd ending to it. And I think this is about this soul that had a choice, made a decision, and is now trapped in darkness. And it's spoken about from our narrator, who has been our narrator this whole time. The Siren says, night falls, light fades to shade, lost in the sun's demise. He lies there alone, a cold, wandering soul, lost to the stars in the sky. The cold sinks and settles in, shivering in the dark he waits for the lonely moon to rise. From the frozen earth he watches, Venus glowing soft, illuminating the night. Interesting. Verse 2, I'm not quite understanding. What's really interesting is it says that this person is so detached, right? They're lost in darkness, they're hidden there. They're going to have 100 days of silence, peace, and darkness. I'm not quite sure what the 100 days of lonely, bitter light are, though. Because it said if the sunlight ever touches your soul, it vaporizes or whatever. But there's one line that comes in between our second chorus and our final chorus. It says, a single spark is worth the fight. Does this mean that this soul, this person who's given up their soul is going to try to get it back from our siren? Also, there's a lot of S's here. The band is Seven Spires, the album is Solveig, and the narrator is the Siren. A lot of S's going on. And I think that's pretty much what's going on there. I'm not too keen. No, not keen. I'm not too sure about the 100 days either. I thought it said that the soul would be trapped forever, that the siren would take the soul for all of time. Now it seems to just be 100 days. Unless we're saying that after 100 days is when this soul decides to fight back and gain autonomy. I don't know. I have a lot of questions here. There's definitely, I think, a strong connective tissue between all this, establishing some sort of world where this is normal. And I think that's pretty cool. But it also means that I'm missing out on some of the stuff that's more specific to it. All right, so we're at the halfway point. What do I think so far? I'm intrigued. There's some phenomenal writing in here. There's some phenomenal performance from everybody. The drummer is mostly metronomic, but has some really nice fills. The guitarist, I'm not a real big fan of the riffs, but the solos are very well done. The bass work is fantastic. I love that the bass has presence and has a really strong tone to it. I wish the bass had some more complex things to do, but I'm actually fine with what it's doing. It's not just sitting around doing nothing, copying the guitar or anything. It has its own lines, and that's good enough for me, which is kind of sad the bar's so low, but that's metal bass work for you. The bar has to be low because I barely hear the bass in most tracks. And our vocalist, at least to me, is the star of the show. Again, not to discredit anybody else, but being both the composer and having such a range, that to me is just bonkers. So let's continue on. We're going to get into our first track that was for Solveig. Track number 8 on the album, Stay. I love the string stingers off on the side, over on the right. Is it just me, or do the orchestral elements have a different presence to them? Really nice transition into the chorus. Coming out of the chorus into this lead guitar line is a little rough. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I was planning on just running this into the next, and I think we're going to do a few in a row now, unless something stands out to me. But being that this is the first of the new batch, if we can call it that, I want to talk about some stuff here. First of all, is it me or is the production vastly different on this? It feels night and day. And this has so much more presence to a lot of everything. The vocals, the guitars, the drums, the orchestral elements, everything just feels a bit bigger, present, listenable. Listenable, clear, I think would be the one I want. Which kind of leans into the idea that I was thinking, where the first seven might have even just been made for the EP, but then reused for this without being re-recorded. Um, I don't know. Again, maybe I know, maybe no one else hears this. I don't know. I should start doing these live so I can bounce these ideas off of people. Um, but there is a drastic change in composition. This is something that we haven't really heard much at all, and it could just be a one-off as well. We heard a little bit of this in Choices and a very little bit of it in Counter, but for the most part, the rest of our opening seven tracks kind of separated our metal and our symphonic elements. We had a little bit of overlap, but not like this. I absolutely love that guitar solo at the end leads into a lead guitar melody that trades off, like, I don't know, every two bars the guitar did something and then held a note, and then a violin did two bars and held a note, and the guitar did two bars and held a note, and it was just, yeah, where has this playfulness been, right? This is the kind of counterpoint I thought we would hear more of, and I think this is why the second half of the original seven tracks kind of fell off a bit for me. Not even the second half, is it? It's a short, because Choices is on the back half, and I really love that. Maybe it's not really, maybe it's just like a 50-50 split, like throughout the seven tracks. Half of it I really loved and I praised, and the other half I felt was just a bit too much straight metal. And this is just a really nice midpoint. There are some sections in here that are more metal, but for the most part, a lot of this has a nice split of both sides. We got a nice lower end brass section in here. I think we had a tuba even, which is something we haven't heard up to this point. Um, it's just a really big song on all levels, with the layering being the most dense we've had in a few tracks. And I'm really hoping this is the direction going forward. I am. I want more of this because it's just so good. I want more interaction between the two halves. I want the classical and the metal to work together again, like we heard at the beginning of. Was that Encounter? I don't remember anymore. I'm tired of the separation where sometimes we'll have an instrument with the metal group, or sometimes we'll have a guitar thing going on with some symphonic stuff. For the most part, they've been separated, and having them paired together again, that's what I want. This one also seems to have a energy to it that we haven't heard in a couple of tracks, and that energy might be production. Like I'd mentioned, this sounds different than our previous few tracks. Um, but there's a drive to it that isn't from, the drum work or the fast guitar playing. We've had those in previous tracks, but they sound flat, or at least my memory of them sounds flat compared to this. This was a very electric, and I don't know if that was a composition thing. I don't know if it was because I don't even know the order any of this was recorded, so I can't even say that this was the first time back in the recording studio since making the EP. But um, something just feels refreshed here, and I really like this. Let me hit the lyrics, and then like I said, we're gonna run a couple back to back because unless there's some drastic change, I'm hoping they stay with this sound, and it's just going to be a lot more of the same. Which is, well, let me touch on this because we are kind of moving in that direction. I talked about in the beginning of the album that it was really nice how each song had its own identity, and I feel like that has been slowly, it's becoming less of a talking point for me because it's happening less and less, and I guess some of that's just going to be due to the fact that there's only so many combinations you can have of instruments, especially if you are looking at things like the string section and the brass section, which is primarily what gets utilized in here. So it's either a song that's using the violins or it's using, trumpets and trombones and stuff. We don't really have too many solo instruments. It's the string section and the brass section. So it's actually not bringing as much variety to the table. And through that, I think I'm hitting a point where the songs are starting to sound more similar than they did at the beginning, where I felt a lot more diversity. And this is not a bad thing. I want to start this out. It's not a bad thing. But this is something that I think is going to work better in a casual sense than a critical sense, especially on this back half of the album, where I think we're going to have less and less new things to talk about, which is just sort of something that happens with album reviews. Unless a band is changing their sound up every single song, the back half is going to be more of the same. And maybe there'll be specific things I want to talk about, but it's not going to be like the opening 10 minutes where I spent 40 minutes or whatever talking about that opening group of tracks because there was so much new stuff to talk about. And now it's more of, well, this was like this, and this was like this, and this was like this. So, all right, I'm going to hit some lyrics, and then we'll probably listen to a pocket of tracks. So, assuming I haven't lost my mind and that this is still a connected series of events of some sort, we just left off with our Siren telling somebody that she could ease their pain, but it would cost them their soul. They said, "Fine, take my soul." And it seemed like at that last moment, there was a glimmer of hope that they would fight for their soul back. Maybe. But that they had 100 days of silence and peace ahead of them. This could indicate that some time has passed. Our Siren returns to this soul. Although, I mean, it could honestly be any soul. I don't know how long the Siren's been at this. This could also have been a huge time skip. Like, I don't know. But anyways, our Siren says, wouldn't it be grand to never face the morning sun? Don't you long to rest your weary head for good? By the light of the crescent moon, I pray your soul will keep. So close your eyes. That's our chorus. That I could make it so that things are a little easier for you. Once again, tying into this theme, right, of helping people find peace. When the sun slips down to dusk beneath the horizons where you'll be all but enveloped by your sins. So at the end of the day, it's just you and your sins, right? It says you can watch your body turn to dust, to toss to the wind and scattered by all your memories and your nightmares. So like, this is the tragedy that your future could have, but I can help you get around that. Our bridge says, "Darling, I've got you now. Don't cry. The pain only lingers if you fight. Hush now, you've got nothing to fear. It's only the end to come to take you to sleep." So I don't know who our Siren is talking to in this point. It could be another human that she has her eyes set on, a soul that she wants, or it could be the soul that we saw before our intermission. Not a real intermission. I'm just kind of making that up. I should probably stop this whole idea of like the original 7 and the new 8, but I think it's just a really interesting perspective that we haven't really gotten to see too often, is an album that uses the EP. So many first EPs are that. There might be a revamp of one or two of the songs on their first LP, but you don't really see the whole thing used wholesale. Just bring the whole EP onto the new LP and start from there. To me, it's fascinating. It shows a lot of vision, I think. It's kind of what I talked about earlier, where maybe it was always a 15 track thing, but they needed something to show, some sort of, demo disc to send to people and to sell it at gigs and stuff like that. So they put the 7 out that they had. but this seems to mostly retread a lot of thematic ground we've already seen. So I'm thinking I don't know. It's at an interesting place. I think I'd have to know more about their intent and where they were at when they recorded this track and wrote it compared to the other seven, which are very cohesive together. This almost feels like hey, if you remember last time on Dragon Ball Z, this is what happened. Um, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting here. All right, so the next track up we have is called The Paradox, and like I said, we're probably going to run a couple of these back to back unless they do something that's drastically different that I need to talk about in that moment. So, let's dive into this. Tons of layers. The guitars, strings all working together. Background clean vocals we had. And this is the first track to have primarily harsh vocals. Very Danny Elfman. so weird for the surrounding elements to stop anytime there's a guitar solo because it makes them feel so empty. Yeah, that was an interesting track. Yeah. This is a different band than we listened to in the first 7. This track and the last track have a drastic increase in compositional maturity. There we go, a little. Whoa! All those additional vocal layers. And see, everything cut out. This feels empty. I thought that was the ends. And see, it fills back in on the outsides. passing on of melody. Yeah, and a really good ending. We'll do one more, and then I got a lot of stuff I want to talk about. This is a different band. I can't believe that this is the difference of what, probably months. That bass is still gnarly though. Such a big sound. I love how it's juxtaposed by the piano. Also putting the bass center channel and kind of pushing the treble instruments just a bit out to the side. Perfect. Yeah, what was that, like a 3-beat piano idea? Beautiful. This has a lot of darkness we haven't heard on a track in a while. Pairing the vocals with the piano and violin line. One of the few guitar solos to have an additional instrument to it. Yeah, this is oh man. This is everything that I loved about Choices, consistently present. They're still exploring different sounds for each song. They have different vibes. Um, but they're doing so with a much stronger musical maturity, compositional maturity, through expanded use of the orchestral elements alongside the metal ones. It got to a point where I had pointed out several times, even made a note of it, that the Phrygian idea came up so often in the back half of the first seven tracks that it was kind of like every song I was waiting for. When are they going to go into the Phrygian mode? And we haven't really heard that at all in these new tracks. And the first seven also tended to jump back and forth between the metal and the classical. And once again, we're hearing more of them combined. There were a couple of harsh vocals in our first seven, but they were always relegated to secondary parts that we quickly moved away from. And we had a full song, well, not a full song, but almost a full song of just harshes. Um, this is just. I feel like this is a band who didn't know what they would be able to market. And I don't want to say that and imply that they were only about the financial side of music creation. I firmly believe that this is artwork to them, that they're putting their souls into their souls. They're putting everything they have into these tracks. But especially on a first album, especially your first EP, there's a balancing act between diving into what you want to make, which might even be a bit outside of your skill level at the time, and being something that is going to get in front of people's faces, especially if you're wanting to make a career out of it. Part of that is being profitable, right? Which is very difficult in the music industry. But if you want this to be your full-time gig, you have to make something that people are going to want, and sometimes that means compromising your vision for something a bit more marketable. And I don't want to imply anything, but the three tracks we just heard feels very strongly like them, more so than the first seven did. So I don't. Well, I mean, it feels more fully realized. I don't know how much of that was them holding themselves back. I don't know how much of that is them growing between these two albums. 2014 to 2017. Holy cow. I was not, because earlier I had said, this is a ton of growth for a few months. I figured that given that the first seven songs were the same ones from the EP, I figured they had come fresh off of that and started working on their next ones. And that might be true, but the release date was 3.5 years between the two albums releasing. So yeah, that is plenty of time to grow as musicians, as composers. That explains why the composition's more fleshed out. I'm going to wager that our vocalist feels more comfortable with her harshes here. Maybe she didn't feel as comfortable with them when they recorded their first EP. And that's why they were utilized less and more often utilized as a texture layer to add on to the clean rather than to be used in isolation. 3.5 years. Jeez. Yeah, so that is, again, I don't know if they just copied their recordings from the EP onto this. I still feel like there's a massive what is this? Shift in sound, in production, and quality between these two. So it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't re-record them. If they did, I'm kind of wondering why I hear a production difference, but again, that could just be my ears. Anyways, it's just night and day. It really is. between the first seven and those four that I just got done listening to. Um, Now, I just mentioned that there's more growling now, more of the harsh vocal, and it's in isolation. It's not as an additional vocal layer. And here's something really cool. When our vocalist doesn't have clean vocals and goes for the growl, it actually does something on the composition level. It opens up a treble area that wasn't open before. That's what opening up means. Good job, Ryan. It opens up a treble area for instruments to fill in. The voice is no longer there. The voice kind of moves to a textural percussion instrument. And so, what I found really neat is that alongside our guitar riffs, more often we would hear violin or brass ideas, melodies moving alongside the guitar work and sitting under our vocal growls. There was an extra amount of layers, an extra counterpoint going on that we hadn't heard previously, and I wonder how much of that is because this extra space. When you shift only growls, something's missing if you continue to compose as if you had this vocal melody lead. And in a lot of the places where we have pure growling, there's violin or brass counterpoint to our guitar line. And it's just I'm so glad, assuming again is that was for the EP. What about the LP? Oh, see, this is interesting too, is that our guitarist now has writing credits on. Yep, the guitarist has writing credits on all the tracks, although the orchestration is still just our vocalist. Um, where was I going with that? Oh, I'm just glad that they had an ear for this because I think it's really easy to, especially on a first time doing something, to just say, okay, I'm better at growls. This whole section is gonna be growls, and then just composing everything else the way it is, and learning from that later. Oh, now it feels a little anemic, um, but they picked it up immediately, and I'm so happy with that. It is just the growth between the opening tracks and this one is and this set of four right here is just phenomenal. Speaking of anemic though, I pointed this out in the last track. I can't unhear it anytime they get not the last track, the one before that. Anytime the guitar decides to solo, the orchestration or the orchestra quits out and it's just like all this empty space. And in any other band, it wouldn't be something I even notice or care about. But because I'm so used to having this very full sound, it's extremely apparent when you remove that every single time for the guitar. It's a pattern I think it's very difficult not to hear. And I was really happy with that last guitar solo we had during the Paradox. Was that the last one we listened to? Oh no, I think it was Depths, where the guitar solo was building into the section that came after it, and the orchestration was helping with this big swell and tension and all of that. Using the orchestra to supplement and to support what the guitar solo is doing, that takes us into the next section. That's the kind of transitions I want. That's the kind of inter-instrument play I'm looking for. Like, that is, yeah, it's one solo out of like 10 we've heard so far, which is a bit of a shame, but I'm glad they're showcasing that they can do it. And that just tells me maybe they don't want to in other places. Maybe they've tried it and they don't like the way it sounds. I don't know. But it is something that I can't unhear. Every time a guitar solo comes in, I'm like, wow, this feels a bit flat now. It's missing that extra, extra stuff out. It's not flat, it's just empty. It feels empty. All the space has been left to be dead air. Um, so I can't I don't know, man. That's just weird. The transitions are getting better. This was one of my big things with the first half of the album. Not all the transitions are smooth. That's just the way they write. I've got to come around to that. Some bands are like that. Metal is kind of like 50-50, whether they got smooth transitions or not. And this one just seems to be like they lean more towards harsher transitions. If we were doing this last bar, now we're going to do this bar, and beat 4 to beat 1 just feels very rough together. I'm slowly coming around to it because the ideas themselves are solid, but it is something. It is something. Um, Vocal layers. I wish I had read this or written it in a better order because got done with vocals. Then went to guitars. Now we're going back to. I wish I could just put all vocals together. Anyways, vocal layers, tons of them. I love it. We have growls with like vocalizations underneath, or growls with a lead melody line with like words to them, or two sets of vocals, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes doing two different things. There's so much vocal work going on now. So many areas have like a choir like vocalization going on where it's not words, it's just like syllables, and they're like just filling out texture and harmonic stuff. It's really great. And what it accounts for is just more layers and more voices, more instruments, which I've already talked about. Is something I love about this band, is that they know when to use instruments and when to hold out from using instruments, and this just gives them more to work with, and it's not always there. It's specifically chosen for sections, and yeah, it's just I'm really digging it. Empty guitar solos I already talked about. So the last thing I want to comment on is that I had mentioned that the latter half of this album was going to kind of move into more of the same from song to song. And we have seen that. Depth was a little bit of a change, but Serenity, The Paradox, and Stay all had generally a similar sound. And so I started going back and thinking about other tracks, and they all generally have this sound as well, and it makes one track stand out. The Cabaret of Dreams. And man, I miss this. I kind of want to revisit this loungy thing again, this loungy metal. And it's not even just that. I'd like to visit anything new. I feel like even going back to a Phrygian mode, as much as it kind of became, a waiting game of when are they going to enter Phrygian in the first half, I'm kind of missing that too. These four songs flow together in a more cohesive way than our opening seven, which, while they had patterns within them, all felt more unique. These all kind of land in the same realm of metal. And that's kind of where I'm sitting here, which again, it comes off as a negative because of the way I'm saying it and because I'm listening to this critically, right? I'm listening for changes. And so when there's not a lot of changes, my brain makes note of that. That's not a bad thing in casual listening, though. If you check out my best of, my favorite albums of 2022 that I released last week, um, some of my favorite albums are just one thing they do very well for an entire album. Seven Spires was really just noise for a full album. They didn't really change things up. Um, so, Greyhaven was kind of the same way. I don't expect bands to always do something different, but when I'm listening to 15 songs back to back, an hour of music, and it all starts to blend together, that has a very different reaction from me listening to it actively like this than if I were listening to it casually. And I have to point it out because it is something that my brain makes a note of. And it's like I said, it's not a bad thing, but I am kind of missing some of the, well, what's going to happen next that we had at the beginning of the album, where Encounter and Cabaret and 100 Days and Choices all kind of had different vibes to them, even if they all had points where they landed into a very typical metal sound that we've heard in the rest of this album. They had elements in them that were different and unique. And Depths is a move in that direction. Depths is very different from the other three: Stay, Paradox, and Serenity. And I appreciate that. It just wasn't a step in a direction I was enthused about. It kind of went to a slower direction, but still heavier. It was moody though, and I liked the moodiness. That is something I kind of been missing. Um, that Cabaret brought. Maybe it's not even so much that Cabaret was just the loungy stuff. It was just a very moody track, and everything else has been energetic, and I'm kind of missing that moodiness. Um, I'm gonna hit some lyrics here, and we'll come back and check out these last four. I think we'll do them in pockets of two, because we have our longest track in here at 8.5. So we'll do 12, 13, break them down, and then 14, 15. All right, be back in a second. All right, so I think I'm gonna need a little bit of direction here, because I feel like their lyrical writing has become more complex. I think we're starting to see things from multiple perspectives, and they may be lining up with vocal deliveries. The harsh vocals and the clean vocals may be different characters. I am seeing, as the story continue, though, I think songs are continuing to call back. Lyrics are beginning to call back lyrics from other tracks, and there seems to be a stronger sense of linear storytelling here. So I think this is a concept album. I'm gonna finish up this review believing it is one, and if it's not, you guys can let me know I screwed up in the comments. Interestingly, this starts out with "There is no afterlife, only this," which is a direct callback to Cabaret of Dreams, which is what the Siren told the person about the Cabaret of Dreams. You lose your soul and your sanity, and there is no afterlife. There is only the cabaret. Um, I don't know who this is supposed to be from the perspective of. We do have a couple of verses that talk about the darkness and bitterness of existence, but then we have a verse that talks about the beautiful mystery within everyone, the universe of emptiness that lies within us that is full of awe and wonder. And this seems to be counter of what the Siren speaks of these people. I'm trying to remember. I think the Paradox was also the one where we had a couple minutes of harsh vocals and then some cleans, and then it was like alternating between them. And I'm trying to like figure out some of the, because there is like I said, there's this thematic difference where we kind of have this negative aspect and then more of a positive aspect. Um, Interestingly, the bridge talks about avoiding the darkness, right? Because this whole time she promises, I'll get rid of your pain, but I'll take your soul and put you in darkness, right? That's the whole shtick. It says, evasive is the ecstasy of sleep. I reach for that horizon forever, just out of reach to cross the threshold into darkness. I think this is supposed to be the soul being pushed into darkness, but not reaching that sleep state, not actually getting into the darkness. It says evasive is this ecstasy of sleep. Can't quite grasp it. Which is interesting because it lends itself into the next two tracks. Serenity is about, it looks like the Siren telling the soul that, I've would, man, what is it? Oh, the bridge. I swore to give you all you need. I swore to fulfill every dream. Don't you fall into a sleep where I can't reach you. So this is interesting. I'm not sure if there is care being given here or if this is something about power. If this soul reaches this part where she can't reach it, then she doesn't get whatever she gets out of souls, which is something that hasn't really been mentioned yet. The Siren likes to steal these souls, but it doesn't really say what she gets out of it. I don't have any motivation for this character. But this whole song, Serenity, seems to be talking about a reminder that I can help you find that peace you're looking for. So don't go into the depths, right? Verse 2 specifically talks about this. Says, down into the depths we dive, searching for the numbness you traded for your life. Could you drown? Crush the air out of your lungs, but you will never die. So there is this sense that this soul is like plummeting into water, into the depths of water. And the Siren trying to stop them from doing so. And then we go into the track Depths. And this one, I don't know whose perspective it is told from again, because it seems to be embracing the cold and the dark, but it has simple language. And says, now I beg for dreamless sleep. I pray here that my soul will keep, which is a line that's popped up several times. Crushing silence fills up lungs, ice preserve the skin and bone. I beg for dreamless sleep, an endless dream with time untold. I pray these waves a life will hold. It almost sounds like this is the soul has sunk down and is trying to find peace here, but this isn't the peace that the Siren wanted to give them, so the Siren's trying to keep them out of this, possibly. I don't know. I'm very lost. I feel like with just a little bit of help, a little bit of direction and hint, I could understand all of this, but I'm just at the cusp there, and it just slips through my fingertips. I'm getting the general gist of everything, but that's really about it. All right, moving into the next track. Like I said, we're going to do two at a time. We got Distant Lights, and then we have our 8.5-minute epic. We'll chat about those, then we'll dive into our final two. So let's see what's going on with Distant Lights. Very epic, tons of layers, vocalizations. This is kind of like emo post-hardcore area. In fact, this song reminds me a lot of I Am Ghost. I love that octave up to the final. Interesting, delayed it on the second time through the chorus. interesting how simple this composition is. The energy from the end of the last verse did not lead into this very well. Yeah, that's the way to end the track. Yeah, this is bringing back some of that theatric moodiness. Yeah, where's this going? Taking that same idea, repurposing it for a hyper groovy section. We still have that string line in the back. We also have a violin line that starts on the left and moves to the right. That's the guitarist on vocals, right? Bass just killing it. Yeah, moving. Oh, okay. I'm always looking forward to these parts. That was a nod to something else. I'll go wherever you are, something. Man, what is that song?
All I have to offer is a memory, a song upon your tongue for you to hold. Deep in the ashes, would you bury me and bear the wicked fire to walk alone?
Yeah, let's have more bass lines like this. That was a whistled tone. So good. I feel really bad for saying this, but the metal is getting in the way of the music. There are some aspects of that track. I'd say most of the aspects of that track, where the metal was required to deliver the emotion they wanted. Metal does a fantastic job at being loud and aggressive and powerful and big, and yeah. definitely some sections in there that require that, and we're better off for including it. But that ending was not. All of the emotion that I felt leading up into that final section, right after we brought the vocals down, like to like the huge big emotional moment. The vocals come down, and she says like one last thing, and we get this beautiful string and auxiliary percussion section, and the brass comes in, and like this big swell up, and instead of going somewhere interestingly layered, we just put big guitar chords and bass, like loud bass kicks on it. And like that's not as impactful as what we had before, or where implied we were going. That removed all of the emotion from that scene for me. I can't even speak. It has me flabbergasted. I can't. I know what they were going for. They wanted to be this big, epic moment, but I really think, actually, I know because we've been shown this before. Adrian has the skills to portray this emotion with the same depth and epic width with the pure orchestral side. Or even she could have included the metal band in less of a stereotypical metal fashion as well. There's just a lot of ways that we could have used the metal's sound without falling into that trope of the weight means epic and the weight means emotional. Um, and like I hate criticizing it like this because one, I don't know that I could have done this better on my own. I can certainly make notes on improvements, and of course, the improvements are going to be my bias, right? Um, they may be notes that if I could hypothetically have given to the band 5 years ago, they might not have even liked anyways. They're what I think would have made it better to my ears. Um, where was I going with that? Oh yeah. I was saying, I don't know that I could do this on my own though. I can certainly add notes and improve upon the foundation that they already have, but this is some phenomenal writing, and maybe I'm just being humble right now, but the emotional impact of the last minute or so, barring that metal outro, I think is a bit beyond my skills. So like it feels weird for me to sit here and say this could have been better. But also, it's hindsight, right? I'm listening to this after it's been made. Maybe they'd have the same ideas that I would 5 years later. They were making this at this time. They were very specific people at this time. So there's like a lot of things that go into it. Plus, it was their first album, so that comes like I feel weird criticizing it in this way, but that is how I feel about that ending. Is that it's it undercuts what it was aiming for, and it's not due to a lack of skill. Maybe this is exactly what they wanted, and this criticism is completely unwarranted in their eyes, and that is perfectly fine. I'm just some dude on the internet, and if I was given this, I know the direction I would have taken it, and that wouldn't have been it. But that might not have been their vision, so that's fine. But um, I I I guess what I'm saying is I don't agree with how they decided to end this, because personally, to my ears, it undercuts what's going on. I don't want to go into that anymore. I think I've said my piece on it. I'm just really, I felt disappointment with that ending because I don't know, just the metals getting in the way of the composition in that one case. Um, Here's something else I want to talk about. Uh, Across both of these tracks, and actually everything that we've listened to today on this album, we have this extremely emotive, dynamic composition style in the orchestral work, the exclusively orchestral work, especially when we go back and listen to the Siren, even right there at the end of Burn, when we got just the orchestral stuff, it is massively dynamic. And I love that. The layers can grow and shrink, the volume rises and falls, accents change. Um, there's different feelings that go into it. We have legato and we have staccato for different attacks that can lead into different emotions. It's just very dynamic. Every moment could sound different than the one prior to it. The metal does none of this, which is typical for metal. And this isn't really something I've had to talk about too much about any other band, but I find it distracting when the classical side will take me on a journey and then we get to an inclusion of the metal, like that part in particular that we even included, where there's a nice ebb and flow to the music, to its drive, to its intensity, to its volume, to even how specific notes are played. I had mentioned all those sforzandos that we got in the opening introductory track, the Siren, I think it was what it was called. Yeah. Um, Beard hair in my mouth. Um, and like all these nuanced ideas. And then the metal comes along and it's all driving, mostly, eighth and 16th notes. We got to get those pedal tones in there and it's all at one volume. And it ends up feeling flat, even if it's supposed to be the biggest part of the track. And it was fine for a while, but it's really grating on me now. And I feel like that was one of my big problems with that final section was that we had this beautifully emotive part and then we went to ramp it up and then we just hit a wall. I mean, quite literally, I was watching the audio visualizer and it was just pretty much solid. The sound wasn't moving, there was no dynamic quality to it. Um, and it's just I feel like the dynamic composition is so strong that to me it kind of sucks to cover it up with the metal, the rigidity of the metal. And it works in some places, like I just mentioned. There's definitely parts of all these songs where that rigid power and width and constant drive and attack is necessary to come up to get these emotions across. It work especially well with the harsher vocals, but every time the pure orchestration or the pure orchestral stuff pops up, I'm reminded, oh yeah, this band writes some really strong dynamic music. And as soon as I remember that, it's usually brought up to a specific level where the metal part comes in and I'm like, "Oh, there go the dynamics." And I hate that that is a feeling I have. It's almost come to a fear whenever I hear the volume settle down and flutes and violins and trumpets coming in and stuff like that. I'm like, "Yes, this part is going to pass too quickly." And I always feel that and it's such a shame and I look forward to future albums from them to see how they balance this, if they balance this at all. Maybe they're really happy with the style they've landed on here and they keep working on it, and that is perfectly fine. As I've said many times in the past, people should make music for themselves, not for other people. These criticisms here are what I want as a listener. But it's just I hate that that's a feeling I have because I love those moments and I dread when they happen because I know they won't last long. And that the metal that ends up coming in to augment it or replace it is not going to hit the same uh, dopamine centers of my brain. And it's just not, it's going to be a bit of a letdown. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? Because that's like a fairly negative part for a song I really enjoyed. Burn was fantastic. Distant Lights was very cool. So yeah, let's talk about this real quick. Distant Lights reminded me a lot of I Am Ghost. It had a very post-hardcore feel, not so much to the guitars, which still had the tone of well the rest of the song, the rest of the album. They didn't really change that. The drumming kind of felt a little more post-hardcore than metal. The vocals were 100% post-hardcore though, and there were even specific melodic lines that I swear could have been ripped straight out of something from I Am Ghost. I have no idea if the vocalist listens to any post-hardcore or where their inspiration for the melodies in this song came from, but it is such a drastic departure and a bit of a breath of fresh air for running into the final 12 minutes of the album. Burn was also a drastic change as well. So this was just a really good block of tracks for changing things up, which is kind of what I said coming into this. Depths was a shift, but prior to that, we had like three, four, five songs. Well, no, because we had 100 Days in there. So we had three songs back to back that were very similar to some of the stuff we explored at the beginning. So yeah, this was a much needed break here of Depths, Distant Lights, and Burn. Distant Lights also, if I remember correctly, featured the least amount of orchestration to it. It was primarily just the rock band, and it followed a very, very predictable pattern throughout the structure, how they went to things. Even the guitar solo I felt was a bit more. I was a bit more like post-hardcore would be then. Because we've heard basically everything so far has just been a lot of shred. I feel like we got a little less shred there. I haven't brought that up yet. I'm not a big fan of just pure shred, and that's what all the guitar solos have been, and that's why I haven't brought it up. But I figure we're in the negative block of comments, so let's go for it. I hope the guitarist in future albums goes for something a bit uh with a bit more storytelling element to it. It feels like so much of this album is dedicated to crafting atmospheres and doing storytelling through the music, and the lyrics tell a story, and then the guitar just kind of pops up every once in a while and says, "Hey, look what I can do." And it like it there's always a key change with it. Or if there's not, the guitarist chooses to pick a lot of notes out of the key. It ends up feeling chromatic or atonal at times. Um, it always feels like the pacing gets dropped because metal needs guitar solos. And there's a story going on, and this guitarist shows off every once in a while in it, and it doesn't do anything for the storytelling. And I don't want to put the blame for that on anyone. I don't want to call the guitarist out specifically and, hey, you're attention seeking or anything like that. I don't know where the decision came to put so many guitar solos in here that don't line up with what's going on storytelling wise, narratively. And I'm talking about narratively, not just lyrically, but musically as well. But it is very strange. And I think, it's very strange to be getting into an atmosphere and to hear the music swelling and moving into different emotions, and the vocalist is like getting into these emotions and telling this story, and then we just enter this pocket of like 30 seconds that kind of feels meaningless to everything else. Like, this is the stuff, if it were a film, would be cut out and put into the deleted scenes section. It's still something they're proud of, but it didn't fit the pacing of the film. That's what this feels like. The solos are not bad. I just don't feel like they fit the context, if that makes sense. Um, Anything else I want to get off my chest? This has been the this has been the most negative part of the analysis all day. No, I think that's about it. We'll just go forward with positivity now. I still really liked. My voice is going. I really like Distant Lights. It feels more like the music I like to listen to casually, with a little bit of that extra metal element in it that they kind of bring to the table. Like, it's their style, but merged a little with post-hardcore, and I think that's really cool. Compositionally, though, like I said, it was the simplest track compositionally, and I wonder if the lyrics might lean into some of that. Burn is obviously their most ambitious track. It does a lot of stuff. It is their longest as well, um, and I think it's their most emotive. Everything else has sort of been matter of factly telling the story how it is. We do get the thoughts of our main character, of our Siren. Occasionally, I think the perspective changes, and once again, we get the thoughts of this person, but we don't really get emotion. And the ending of Burn was, I think, this first moment of emotive display um, for our main character, I think, the Siren. Just a very, very cool moment. I kind of wish we'd have more of that. It would get me more engrossed into the story. I'm glad it was there, though. I'm glad we got something on this album. Um, yeah, I'm going to hit some lyrics real quick now, since I'm kind of already on that topic, and then we'll wrap this up with our final two tracks. And see, this is where being able to bounce ideas around live would really help, because I probably would have come across this conclusion a long time ago. We're probably not talking about real souls. So, a siren in Greek mythology? I could be off on that. Anyways, it's one of the ancient mythologies. The sirens would sing songs to lure ships uh, out at sea to come to the island and, well, whatever. Oftentimes, though, it was to disrupt the sail, right? To either cause them to crash their boat into something, or to crash their boat onto shore and destroy the bottom of the boat so they can't go anywhere, stuff like that. Um, it was to lead sailors astray, though. And the opening track, Encounter, I am the siren of the eventide to guide your lonely soul to shore. Now, there might still be a supernatural angle to this, because there's still a lot of talk of hellish ideas and stuff. But I think the core concept is that our siren isn't like a demonic figure that is taking people's souls for real. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Like I said, a lot of this is still kind of going over my head, but the sea concept is, well, it's not going over my head anymore. I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to see the sea. Which also goes into the idea that this person was going into the depths of the waves, of the water, um, and being lost in the silence of the depths. Like, it's starting to click now. I can't believe I let the stupid supernatural thing take over because of the cabaret of dreams concept, which is probably, if I had thought about it, all in the dude's mind, because it's a dream cabaret. Like, oh man. Yeah, I followed the wrong thread on that. Anyways, this seems to be that the siren went into the depths, since that was our last track, and got this dude, rescued him from the depths, and says, I'll pledge my final breath to your name, which is the opposite of signing your soul over to her. Here at the end of my days, pray you won't deny my chance to repay another time, another life. Basically, she says, I mean, this might be that she's going against what she's supposed to do, and she knows that punishment will be harsh, but she's saving this person anyways, right? That's pretty much what Distant Lights is about. Burn seems to be about the punishment. The chorus says, I, who guides the lonely souls to shore, stating very clearly who this person is. I love this. I wish more times we could have this direct perspective. Because I think prior to this, we had harsh vocals, and this is very complex speaking. O dormant, hungry fire of morn, heed your master's call. This is a more complex speaking voice. To fill the lungs and pierce the flesh. Like, there's a lot simpler ways to write that. So I think that that's a different person. And let me get to this. I, who guides the lonely souls to shore and takes the host to keep them warm, chained here to ease our pain, succumb to peace for 100 days. It's interesting we're pulling back a lot of these ideas of earlier. 100 days of silence, 100 days of peace. I have found what I set out to find, a love to cut my binds, so end this curse upon my soul, let us bathe in flame so we may burn. I have no idea exactly what's going on here. But this person is asking to be burned alive, to end a curse on their soul. And of course, in our final verse, we hear our narrator, presumably the Siren, I still think, tell this other person to take my breath and build yourself anew. Renew my sentence, take my tears, another 1,000 silent years, just to see your smile light your face once more. So I would do this all over again to see the smile on your face. Now go and live as you've never lived before. So I went against my order. I rescued you. I'm being burned here for you. So don't forget that, because I want you to live. That's what I'm getting. This is a big love story. Kind of. Seems kind of one-sided. We haven't really heard much from the other dude, but that's what seems to have went on in Burn, which is why the ending was so powerful. That's what I really loved about it. So far, the narrator's been very matter-of-factly. This is my job. This is what I do. This is what comes next. Speaking to these people, speaking to us as a narrator. And then this moment, she speaks to somebody else with passion and love and emotion. And the delivery from the vocalist was phenomenal. And it led into that big swell. Like, it was such a good ending. I'm wondering where we go from here. We have 2 tracks left, combined 7 minutes maybe? A little under 8. Next we have Ashes, which makes sense. This is a concept album, isn't it? I don't see how it couldn't be at this point. And then I don't know what Solveig means. Let me look this up real quick. Swedish word. Maybe Norwegian. Female given name of Old Norse origin. Oh, there we go. It's most common in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and also somewhat common in Germany and France. It consists of 2 parts, and I'll see this is the interesting part. Soul, which could mean a lot of stuff. Yellow, sun, horse, home, and Veg, strength, battle, way. There's also a lot of folklore around it, so knowing some of that might help as well. Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of... Oh, man. There's a section in here for in fiction. It says Solveig is a central character in this play, and that's another central character in this novel. Also, there's a character called Solveig in Battlefield 5. Okay. It kind of seems... I mean, it's all fiction, right? I should have expected it, but it just feels so different from everything else. let's wrap this up. Let's dive into Ashes. That button. Dive into Ashes and Solveig and see how they finish the album. Yep. Down tempo. Oh, we got an accordion in here. A little melancholic, which makes sense given what just happened. Very bright, uplifting, powerful. So we have a pop punk positive track. Even has a woe in there. Can't do pop punk without woes. Yeah, I feel very at home in this track. Interestingly, much like our last massive deviation, bright lights, is that what that was? Distant lights. We don't have a lot of orchestration going on. As soon as I mentioned it, this solo perfectly fits what's going on. This is pushing the story forward 100%. Interesting ending to it. No, don't bring... I would have loved a different take on this final chorus. Ooh. We got a very Disney-esque feeling right here. Yeah, let's go. Oh, so good. Still keeping that tension in the background while taking this down a notch. Those half-step rises and falls. So this is actually from one of the previous tracks. Such a good transition. This is from yeah, so this is a bunch of the orchestral elements strung together with transitions between them to reflect on the journey we've been, because it's called Reflect. This is genius. Yes, more like that, please. Do you see what I mean? Do you see how good that is when the metal doesn't come in and decide we need to ramp it up to 11? Do you see how beautifully intricate everything can be? Like, I know this band can create gorgeous music, but because they're a metal band at heart, I feel they I guess they feel like they need to have that presence, and they really don't. Now, maybe this isn't fair. I enjoy metal, but I also really enjoy classical, and I enjoy them for two different reasons. And this is something that I don't think really cropped up much in the past, but I feel like the two things I enjoy about them are clashing. In the past, we've listened to a lot of symphonic metal, and I've just kind of, they work together, right? Right? I don't think they do anymore. I think you can make them work well together, but you have to compromise on both visions in order to achieve something where both of them can come together. And I think this is the album that opened that up to me. I opened my eyes that you can't really find a middle point between classical and metal. They utilize, or they can utilize, a lot of similar techniques, but there's still a lot of things about them that are very different. And to find a metal point means a metal point. To find a middle point means compromise on one or both sides. And here I found too much compromise on classical side, the orchestral side, that continuously frustrated me throughout the album. And this right here, I mean, this is like a what is this, bittersweet to me, because I'm on the one side, I'm like, yes, I feel vindicated. This is exactly what I've been asking for all album, is something like this, and now I can point to it, say, I know these guys can write like this, right? Much like the Siren, these are songs I can point to and say, look at them at the top of their skill of just classical, of just this orchestral writing. But it's also a bit bitter in that bittersweet element, because I feel like we could have had more of this. I would have loved to have more of this, but I don't know where it would have gone either. The album feels dense already, and I don't know that there's too many places where we could have included this and not messed up the pacing or not changed the way that a track felt. I think the only clear example for me would be the end of Burn, and I already put my remarks on that. Um, but I think those are my hopes going forward. I enjoyed this album a lot. Seven Spires has been on my listen list, and I have been purposefully not checking them out because I knew we had an album on coming up. I don't remember what album it was, but I knew we had one album coming up. I'm glad it was our first one. I like to explore art from beginning to end, even if they have nothing to do with each other. I like watching directors' films, the first one they made to the last one they've made. I don't like to skip around too much, even though the films have nothing to do with each other. My friends always laugh at me because I play the Final Fantasy games in order, even though most of them don't connect. But it's like, to me, it's about watching the building blocks of the process as well. This album might have nothing to do with the next album or the next album, but being able to see where they came from compositionally and as musicians, and how they built on and expand is it's really important to me. I find it really difficult to jump into bands later, um, unless it's like a first experience. For instance, I've never heard Greyhaven before. I checked out their new album because I was interested in them based on a reaction, and I figured checking out their new work while it's new is a good way to jump in. But when I go to dig into their other works, I will start at the beginning. I will go through it chronologically. It's just the right way to do it in my mind. So like I said, I'm glad we started with their first one. I'm going to check out the rest of their albums. And something I'll be looking for is the way that they balance these two sides. It's clear to me their compositional skills are really good. There's definitely room to grow. There's always room to grow. You can be a master virtuoso and still have room for growth. But if they don't grow beyond these compositional skills, I'll still be happy. The orchestral compositional skills, the balancing act of the two styles of composition, are something I'll be looking forward to. But as long as the orchestral element stays at this level, I will have nothing to complain about. But I want to see how they work on balancing the two sides and maybe exploring more styles. I really enjoyed the post-hardcore and the man, what was that? Whatever you would classify Rise. To me, that is like feel good rock music with a little bit of a metal edge, but it sounds a lot like stuff I've seen for like parades and like shows at theme parks. A bit heavier, like I said, there's that metal edge, but like the vibe of it was very close to stuff that you would see for like celebrate, like public celebration things, music that everybody likes kind of thing. Um, and I thought that was a wonderful way to end it. It just kind of came out of nowhere, but worked so well. Distant Lights, the post-hardcore thing, Cabaret of Dreams, the lounge thing. Like, I love how they deviate from their norm style and their base style and incorporate other ideas into it without losing that core identity. They don't just shift to a new genre. They just utilize it as inspiration to add on to what they normally do. And I'd love to hear more of that. I don't think I have anything to add on to specifically about these two tracks. Um, Wait a second. So on Apple, track 15 is called Solveig, which is the title track. Right here, though, according to Metal Archives, it's called Reflections. According to Genius, it's called Reflections. Which has probably confused people when I had Solveig up as a title, and I was like, oh, this is a reflection of everything we've done, which makes sense because it's called Reflections. And they're like, no, that doesn't say Reflections, bro. What are you talking about? Because I was looking at it on the Metal Archives page, and it calls it Reflections. I wonder when that changed, how that changed, which one is correct. I wish I could see the back of this album, the back of the CD case, just so I could see possibly. Looks like it was released under 3 different labels too, so it's possible different titles for different labels. Anyways, back on topic though, Ashes was just this phenomenal feel good exploration, just very bright celebratory track. I still think it's funny after I complained that the guitar solos were getting in the way. They gave me one that perfectly lined up with the themes of the track and took us somewhere. Like, yeah, that's what the guitar solos should do. Fantastic job on that. And Reflections, like I said, I pretty sure is a collection of it's a medley, sorry, a medley of several of the orchestral elements we had throughout the tracks woven together with new transitions to create a song that takes us back through the album. I heard 2 ideas that I heard back in the album. I kind of expanded that idea based off of that. So that might not be entirely true, but there's certainly 2 sections that feel very similar to things that we had heard. And it was beautiful. Best track on the album by far. Although it deviates fairly heavily, and I don't like to pick those for my favorite, so we're going to stick with Choices, which was still just a phenomenal track. Um, and then the lyrics. We'll touch on this real quick because why not? Rise is all about making good things come out of bad. It takes a lot of imagery of phoenixes. There's burning pyres, there's ashes. We rise from the ashes. Tiny sparks. Oh, that tiny spark was worth fighting for is a line that comes from one of the other tracks. But it's all about how I think the siren gave her life so that this person could have theirs, and that this other person will do good from this interaction. Kind of the vibe I got out of it. All right, let's wrap this up. This is a big. This was, well, the video is only like 316, but so much reading of the lyrics. They're not exceptionally long, but they're dense. There's a lot of complex uh, voicings in there. So I've spent 4-ish hours on the video so far. It's gonna end up being like 320 or something. This is a long one though. Um, those are my thoughts on Solveig by Seven Spires, their debut album. What did y'all think? Did you enjoy it? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said? Correct me on, or just give me your own thoughts? Put that stuff down in the comment section. Above the comments is a description box, and there's a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here, has links for everything related to the channel. You can find ways to support the channel. You can find a link to the Discord community. You can find a link to my music and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. We got a live stream tomorrow. I'll do my best to get it out tomorrow by 5, which I think I did last Sunday. I want to try to do that since 5 is the time I release, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I should state, is the time I release all my videos. So I think it'd be really cool just to get that lined up. It's not a lot of work, but it's not a little bit of work either. And I try to take my weekends off. Try to get that nice work-life balance. Try to get that work-life balance. Uh, So anyways, though, and then after the live stream on Sunday, Monday we come back with next week's theme, which is the beginning of a two-parter. It's going to be a 2-week theme to get through because we got 10 songs to check out. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.